Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. I still say Big Blue View Radio. Sometimes I still do that, but we know that the actual audio version of the podcast no longer exists. But we're still here on YouTube, so bringing you as much Giants content as we can. And today we have a special guest for you. We have Ty Dunne of golongtd.com, as you can see on your screen there. And Ty is here to talk about a three-part series he did this week on the Giants. So, Ty, thanks for coming back on the show.
Ed, the pleasure is always here. And one of the highlights of this last trip to New Jersey was hanging out with you on the sideline at training camp. Always learn something catching up with you. So thanks for having me.
See, but I didn't see my name in your three-part series, though. I didn't see myself as a source. Come on, Ty. Come on.
I know it. I think it's implied. You're a godfather
it's all
when it
good.
comes to New York Giants intel.
It's all good. I just have to give you grief. I just have to. It's just how it is. So let me start with this. This three-part series on the Giants, what was it, about 900 million words long? However many words it was.
Hey, we put it in the title of the publication, right? Go long. We let you know. We're warning everybody. You're gonna have to stop what you're doing and get a cup of coffee and sit down, settle in. But yes, it's pretty long.
Now, the last time you did a well-known, well-read series about the Giants, the tone of that series, as far as what the organization was at that time, and the tone of this series is vastly different. Just, for folks that don't subscribe to Go Long, just, tell folks, I mean, if you can kind of summarize what you see as the sort of sea change in the Giants organization.
Absolutely, Ed. And I think, this is season number 5 for Go Long since I launched. I was at Bleacher Report doing long form stories before this, the Buffalo News, the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. So I've been around the game really since about 2007, 2008 is when I started covering the NFL. And the longer I'm around these teams, talking to GMs, coaches, scouts, players, of course, man, the thing that fascinates me the most is everything that happens behind the curtain, everything beyond the podium, beyond the press conference. There's messaging put out by all teams, right? Set the agenda for the day. And by and large, a lot of coverage that we all do kind of falls in line. And, we all will sit down and maybe do a long form story here, a feature story there, a scathing column from time to time, all that. But I've always been blown away by the stories you hear that never see the light of day. And you referenced that first Giants series, the autopsy at the end of, I believe, 2021. And I've done a few of those series at Go Long, in that vein of the underbelly of pro football can be ugly as hell. I mean, you can look under that hood and it's going to reek, and it's going to be beyond what you can imagine. I mean, I'm thinking of the Mike Zimmer and the Vikings and hearing stuff out of there, what he was like with players, Matt Patricia and the Lions. This was a coach who was very inauthentic. Guys didn't respect him. Brian Flores and Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, I had heard they were clashing, and there's a lot of stuff. And sometimes it sees the light of day. Sometimes you hear about a head coach trying to inspire players by telling them to come together like the terrorists on 9/11.
Well, you do hear about it when Tua goes on a show and calls
exactly
a horrible person.
So sometimes it does. And I think maybe that first Giants series was a little jarring for fans. And I'm sure yourself, Ed, and people around the team, you had an idea that it was pretty ugly. And just hearing from a lot of those scouts that have come through there and what they said the work environment was really like kind of blew my mind, right? As one scout said, you got the assholes need not apply sign on the desk and who's the biggest one in the building. So to hear just how the state of that team, how bad it was beyond the field, which was bad. Those last two games could end up being the greatest blessing in Giants history because it forced the ownership to move on from Joe Judge and Dave Gettleman. Beyond that, it was so bad. I just don't know if people understand. And I get it. If people want to roll their eyes, hey, why are you talking about Dave Gettleman again? It's been 2 years. It's year 3. I get that. And we'll get to this regime and the pressure they face this year. But I think it is important to understand the state of affairs that this franchise was in when Joe Shane arrived and Brian Daboll arrived. Culturally, it was shot. I mean, they had obviously no money to spend, about 14 grand rolled over, like laughably bad. Uh, the whole front office needed an overhaul. How they scout players needed an overhaul. Even Brian Daboll, when he hires a staff, that's been overhauled. He only hired, I think, like 5 coaches he had worked before. And, you're going to have some mistakes in there. So I think it really has been this 3-year process to get to a place where now you're ready to compete. And it's been kind of jumbled. They won when nobody thought they'd won, and they lost and had those injuries when we kind of thought they might win. But now they're healthy, they have depth. And I really think this could be the 2024 version of the Detroit Lions.
Interesting. It could be, there are people, Connor Orr of Sports Illustrated is one who said he thought the Giants might be a sneaky good team. But let's stay on the topic of that underbelly a little bit. What I have said about Joe Shane, and by extension Brian Daboll, is look, the Giants were bad for 10 years, maybe more than 10 years. They've been mostly bad ever since they won that last Super Bowl. And that was the end of the Jerry Reese era. That was the Dave Gettleman era. And when Gettleman was GM, I always said, hey, he's got the right to make the decisions that he wants to make. And if he's going to go down in flames, making the decisions that he wants to make. But the point is, you don't get bad for 10 years, 12 years, and then fix it. And all of a sudden be a model franchise and be a perfectly humming machine in 1 or 2 years. You just don't. It takes time. Like you said, 2022 was kind of a happy accident. But to me, it feels like we're finally at the point, whether the Giants will be good or bad or whatever. To me, just it feels like the Giants are finally at that point where they're out from under the mistakes of the last decade, where they've finally begun to structure the team that Joe Shane wants, the team that Brian Daboll wants, the direction that they want. And it feels to me like they're at the beginning. Just your thoughts on all of that.
I think you're absolutely right. And it's kind of twofold. I think that internally a lot had to change. And maybe this is a product of I've been trying to read some business books and get inspired, especially this time of year ahead of the football season. The grind ahead. And I can't recommend Simon Sinek's books enough. Start with Why, The Infinite Game. This guy is brilliant. And in The Infinite Game, he gets into workplace environment a ton and just how you inspire people underneath you to wake up in the morning and have a just cause. Like just have a reason to get that cup of coffee, get to the office. If you're a scout, go to, BF Egypt, middle of nowhere, boondocks in a crappy rental car on 2 hours of sleep. How do you get that person excited to go do the best job they can possibly do? It takes inspired leadership. They didn't have that for a long time with Dave Gettleman. And we kind of thought they might have it with Joe Judge. He said a lot of the right things. I remember wanting to run through a wall at some of those early press conferences. And then the more he talked, the more his team played, the more a lot of these players realized there was a lot of hot air. And he it was fake at times. When you're talking about no golf clubs being at lockers and you have the kind of performance you have on Sunday, there's a disconnect there. I think that Joe Shane just gets, you need your scouts, all of the execs underneath you, the head coach understands all these. You got to have a just cause. I think they have that. I think that everybody, it feels a part of this thing. Scouts underneath Dave Gettleman, they really didn't feel a part of it. Most that I talked to, which was several, they didn't feel like their voice was heard. They felt like they needed to, quote unquote, please Dave Gettleman, tell him what he wants to hear. He had an opinion on a player, and if you differed from that, if you detoured from that in any way, you were, what I was told, kind of shunned, which is insane. I mean, that's freaking insane. If you want to win games in football, you need vibrant debate. You need to have open dialogue, go back and forth, have these drag out fights over prospects. That's the only way you're going to think outside of the box and maybe draft a player.
You need somebody to tell you that trading half your draft class for DeAndre Baker is a bad idea.
Forgot about that one too. Oh my God.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just had to throw that in there.
There's so many things you forget about. You do need somebody to speak up in that instance. And I don't think that those voices were encouraged. If anything, they were discouraged, and it's the opposite now. Like Joe Schoen has surrounded, and we saw it. I mean, we saw it on Hard Knocks, right? You've got Dennis Hickey, Chris Rossetti, Brandon Brown, all these people around Joe Schoen that are willing to speak up, speak out. Even, look, Tim McDonald, I know he's the nephew of John Mara. He's got a voice too. I loved his question. All right, we lose Saquon. What's our identity? And I love Joe Schoen's answer to that even more. This is the kind of stuff I don't think really was happening as much as it should have been before. It's happening now. I mean, during the season, because Joe Schoen was in their shoes not too long ago. He was a scout, driving all over the place, spending over 9 years of his life living in a Marriott, missing birthday parties with his kids, all that stuff. He gets it. So he wants these scouts to hop on Zoom calls with him during the year. Let's catch up. Let's see what you're working on. Let's have you be a part of this thing. So I think that's one part of it, right? Just getting people to want to work there. And then the second part we can get into as well is just actually finding the players, right? Finding your kind of player.
Right. And I think the other part of that with Joe, I just wanted to throw out a quick example of what you were talking about with pushback before I get into this. I remember Brandon Brown, as we saw in Hard Knocks, Joe was saying, oh, Illuminor wants this. And we said we would only go to $6 million for Illuminor. And Brandon Brown basically looked at him and he said, Joe, are you going to let $1 million stop you from getting the top player on our board?
Exactly.
And that's the kind of, hey, think about what's important here to, that you need from the people underneath you. But so, but it's just one of those deals where, for me, the other thing with Joe, you talked about finding the players, and you talked about Joe still being a scout, and whether the thing for me is Joe is out there. Joe's out there weekend after weekend, Friday night after Saturday night. He's out there himself as well, watching a lot of these games. I don't think Dave, for health reasons and for other reasons, I don't think Dave was out there very much. I don't think toward the tail end of his time as GM, I don't think Jerry Reese was out there as much as he had been either. And that's important. Seeing these guys face to face, it is important.
I love that point. I love that point, Ed. I think that it's another thing that's hard to quantify. It's not like we can just point to, okay, Joe Schoen he was just somewhere, I want to say yesterday or 2 days, right? He was at the Colorado game.
I don't know if he was at the Colorado game. I didn't see that he was there specifically, but that wouldn't shock me at all. I know that the Giants were repped there, but I didn't know that Joe was there.
I know. I guess we should just plug it into the old tweet machine there. But yeah, I think that it is interesting that here's a guy who has enough on his plate.
Right.
He just goes through roster. I mean, it's something every day, especially during the offseason, which, as we saw, but it is nonstop tweaking and retweaking a roster, always looking for an edge. And we could look at it and say, okay, Joe Schoen is in this city watching this game, and he found this player and they drafted that player. But it's so much more than that. I just think having your eyes on college games as much as possible, like Joe Shane does, like the people underneath him do, it's just going to kind of add to your intel and add to your ability to know what you're looking for into the future. Like you can't. My point is like, who's to say how much that really helps you? But it helps some way somehow to
Right.
just be there if you care.
Right.
Be on the road, learn like as much as possible. You don't know, you're going to see something and you're going to write a report, you're going to make mental notes, you're going to throw it in the back of your football brain somewhere, and you just don't know when you're going to tap back into that. But you are going to tap back into it at some point. Now, if you're sitting at a desk and you're not really listening to other opinions and you're not on the road that much, I don't see how that's a good thing. I just don't.
No, and you're still going to make mistakes. You're still
Right.
going to have players that you just don't get right. Evan Neal,
Yeah, you
uh,
took the words out of my
but
mouth there.
but Evan Neal was one where 95% of scouts and analysts and everybody thought the Giants made the right pick. He was absolutely a top 10 guy, and sometimes it doesn't work out. But my point was, if you've done the work, if you've had the discussions, if you've listened to pushback, if you've listened to scouts who say, we love this guy, we don't know why you don't, or we don't get what you see in this guy, we should stay away from him for these reasons. If you've done that work, you can at least say we made the best decision that we could make. It not, I sat in my office and I watched a little bit of film and I think this guy can play, and so we're just drafting him.
Which happens. It happens on
Well,
good teams too, Ed. I mean,
the
San Francisco early on with Kyle Shanahan, I really heard that those coaches had a louder voice than even a lot of the personnel people, and it kind of frustrated some of the scouts. And they missed on some picks early on. I think of like Joe Williams, the running back, like Kyle Shanahan loved him, and they even on it's one of the best teams in the NFL. I think it happens all over the NFL. And then the other layer is ownership, right? I mean, in Dallas, man, talking to some people that have worked under Jerry Jones, it's like that idea of pleasing Dave Gettleman just loaded into a bazooka and shot. Like you're trying to get Jerry's ear, and not only that, you're trying to get Jerry to think it was his idea to do something. I mean, Jason Garrett had to kind of master this art of pushing Jerry Jones the right direction and having Jerry think it was his idea all along because he's that much of an egomaniac. We think the
it's
NFL is this high tech business. It really isn't. It's people.
no, no, it is. And whatever anybody thinks of Jason Garrett, by the way, and we're way off the track here, but whatever anybody thinks of Jason Garrett, the man managed to coach the Dallas Cowboys and keep Jerry Jones at arm length for a decade. And he's got to get some props for having managed to do that. Um, but I want to ask you about, you mentioned John Mara, and I think as much as people want to complain about John Mara and, oh, he should sell the team and this and that and the other thing, let's give John Mara some credit, because I think your piece a few years ago detailed really how the Giants had just turned farther and farther and farther and farther inward over the years. And what we're seeing with John Mara now is, darn well he didn't like the idea of letting Saquon Barkley go. And he's still ticked off that Saquon Barkley is a Philadelphia Eagle. And he may or may not have really desperately wanted the Giants to take a quarterback this year. I don't know. But John Mara, to his credit, has gone outside the organization, tried something different, and he is doing what he can. He is trying to let Joe Shane sink or swim the way that Joe wants to.
I genuinely believe that's the case too, Ed. And you just detailed it perfectly. I mean, I think that that's really where this organization got off the rails. It always starts at the top. It always starts with ownership. And I don't even really want to nitpick the whole family dynamic. I mean, we see it. It is what it is when your brother's his official title in personnel with Chris Mara. Oh, do you know his official title at the top of your head? I think might have changed this year.
It did
Co-director of
change. It did change because I think he's farther removed
I
from
think
any
so,
of the from any of the real work now, than he was at the time.
which is a good sign, which tells you that John Mara is willing. This was the first GM hire outside of the organization since George Young in 1979, which obviously was
His
a huge turning point. Like they
his
had to
official
think
his
outside.
official title, by the way, is senior player personnel executive slash board director, which basically tells you he's kind of a figurehead.
You know, and I don't even really want to besmirch his nephew. He might, and I know John's come to his defense pretty strongly with you guys. I think he had a scrum a couple weeks ago, and he was asked. Might have been Pat Leonard asked him the question of just what's his role with the team, and man, he was a little defensive. Like, hey, Tim McDonald's respected around the NFL, which could be true. So I'm not even really talking about the family dynamic. The Giants for years and years and years, when these GM positions come open and you have a chance to really think outside of the box and think about how many qualified candidates are out there and to not really interview those candidates. I mean, Dave Gettleman is just kind of hired to not think outside of the box. And a lot of owners, and I think this is the case with most owners, if not all, they surround themselves with yes men, right? If you say no, if you push back, if you tell a billionaire something he doesn't want to hear, a lot of times you're out of that inner circle. So you're absolutely right. I think it says a lot for John Mara and the Giants that they even hired Joe Shane, number one. But I think he's genuinely empowered. I and there might be some fans that even see him in his office and start to go, "Oh, I don't like seeing that. Get the hell." No, I think it really is, as Joe told me, like telling ownership, explaining to John Mara where we were, where we're going, why we're doing X, Y, and Z. Where we can't pay Saquon Barkley this number because we've got to beef up the offensive line. We've at some point got to get a star player, which ended up being Brian Burns, pulling that trade off. And one move affects another move and another move and another move. And I think a lot of owners don't really understand that. And that's how you get yourself into just absolute jams in salary cap hell. And next thing you know, you're trying to shed salary and get out of it. Joe Shane doesn't want to get in that position. And the way he detailed it to me is ownership is open to hearing everything. There's, as any good owner should want, he wants to hear. John Mara wants to know what the hell's going on, but he does let the Giants do what the Giants should do from a football point of view.
Absolutely, and a lot of that push pull and the Saquon thing is why I said this finally feels like it's not only Joe's roster, it's prioritized the way that he wants it prioritized, and that's why it kind of feels like it's at the beginning. Anyway, I want to move on to Brian Daboll. You are as big a Brian Daboll fan as I know, and you use the word with Daboll. You use the word authentic. Um, and I just before you tell me what you feel about Daboll, a lot of people look at this coaching staff turnover with Daboll this past year as a bad thing. Look, you're going to make mistakes. You're a first time head coach. You're a first time GM. You're not going to get everything right. Um, the Wink Martindale situation was ugly. You don't like that to happen, but I also think that to Daboll's credit, in some respects, you're moving on from Bobby Johnson as the offensive line coach. Bobby Johnson having a close relationship with Daboll, to me shows growth and development and recognition of some things have to change. We have to do some things better. So I'm a fan of this regime, um, and I hope that the wheels don't come off this year. and that John Mara doesn't feel this need to appease the fan base and and blow things up again. So just with all of that preamble, I just want you to talk about what it is that you really appreciate about Daboll.
No doubt. And I think that, if John Mara wants to be honest with this hire and where this team is going with this head coach, man, you dodged a bullet. Those last two games, I think it was right before those two final eyesore performances in 2021 that the report was leaked that the Giants were going to bring back Joe Judge and they wanted him to be a part of the solution. They didn't want to turn this coaching staff over again and again and again. So, and things fall apart. And so you avoid doubling down on that, tripling down on that mistake with a coach who, as Tiki Barber said in our series, is fake, right? I mean, and once players sense that you're being fake and BSing, they're going to tune you out. That's the opposite of Brian Daboll. Okay. And then it would have been right around that time. And, I know we forget how explosive this was, but the Brian Flores lawsuit, within that, you hear about these alleged text messages like the next day with Tim McDonald reaching out to Brian Flores, come win the effing job. I'm hearing Brian Daboll's unhappy with Sean McDermott. You can bring him in as the OC. Like, here's a coach who can coach up a defense, no doubt about it. Brian Flores, that isn't. And coaches can evolve. Maybe he is better dealing with players. But I'll tell you this, Ed, it was ugly in Miami. I had several players down there, several sources really detail that relationship with Tua Tagovailoa, and it was as bad as it could possibly be. And we later found out. I mean, Tua had that interview with Dan Levitard a couple weeks ago and just said how awful that relationship was. His confidence was shattered. Brian Daboll's also the opposite of that. Like, Brian Daboll builds real relationships with players one by one. These players for the Buffalo Bills, 10, 15 minutes from my house here, they just gush about his ability to connect with guys. It's real. It's interpersonal. It's cookouts on an off day. No reason to hang out with your coach when you don't have to, but they want to. You want to eat some burgers with Daboll, maybe throw one back, get to know each other. And the relationship that took off more than any was with Josh Allen, the quarterback, the most important person in the building. And I think that Brian Daboll understood that was the most important person in the building. And he knew, and it isn't like he's this coddling, quote unquote, players coach who just lets guys do whatever they want. I mean, the Bills had that with Rex Ryan and the whole thing blew up. It's not country club atmosphere at all. It's real. I mean, he'll get on Josh Allen like he gets on Daniel Jones there in New Jersey. So it's a needle to thread that I feel like coaches can spend their entire careers never threading. Like they read all these books and they think they try to act like you're supposed to act as a head coach, what they've read, or it's just not natural. It doesn't flow naturally. It's natural with Brian Daboll, and he can push you. And it's not a country club atmosphere. We're there at those practices. It's 95 degrees, man. They're hitting. They ran a ton of 11 on 11 this year, right? A ton more than last year. So he adjusted. He's willing to adjust. He's changed up the coaching staff. He's changed up the way he practices. And to bring it to Daniel Jones, I think that this is finally when you see Brian Daboll's offense in full. Year one, a lot of play action and choice routes to Isaiah Hodgins, who didn't even make the 53s on the practice squad, and orbiting around Saquon Barkley and his 400 touches. Year two is just an apocalyptic string of injuries. I don't know what the hell you make of it. You won a game, some games with Tommy DeVito, for crying out loud. And year three, you finally, this is the offense, and Daniel Jones, it's on you to keep up. We're going to call these plays. We're going to call these explosives. Malik Neighbors is going to be open down the field. You got to complete the pass. And I think that's
just ask Neighbors. He's going to be open. Just ask him. He is, although he is one of those guys who he's open when he's not open, just because you can throw him that 50-50 ball and he'll fight like crazy to make sure he catches it. But yeah, it's interesting. Daniel Jones, I know you talked to him. I've been in a bunch of press conference scrums with him, and maybe the beard signifies all of it, but there's an edge to Jones. He knows what the Giants did this offseason. He knows that had the New England Patriots been willing to play ball, he knows that Drake May would be a Giant. He knows that his time as QB1, as the unquestioned franchise guy, would already be over. And I don't know what's going to happen with Jones this year. Um, I've always thought that there was a better quarterback in there than he often showed. I mean, not Aaron Rodgers level, not Brady level, but I've always thought there was a better quarterback than he's showed quite a bit. What I want to ask you about Jones is, are you confused with Jones as to how a guy can be so beloved in the Giants building, in the Giants locker room, and yet so picked on, so laughed at, so ridiculed outside by everybody who really doesn't know him? It's it's such an odd juxtaposition for me.
It is. And I've vacillated on Daniel Jones, the football player. I mean, there's times where it is comically bad, a mistake, and you're wondering what the hell the New York Giants are thinking. But then he connects with Brian Daboll. It looks really good under really abysmal circumstances. I mean, the players he's throwing to, it was wild to go back and watch some of those games, that comeback win against Baltimore. I mean, he's throwing passes to David Sills and Marcus Johnson. And I mean, not just like little dump offs, he's throwing it into tight coverage. He's making big time throws. So you've seen it, and he gets that team to the playoffs. And then it's yo-yoed year to year. It's unbelievable. I get it. He can be whatever you want him to be. So part of me does understand why there's this vitriol toward him. What are the Giants doing here? Why are they wasting their time with this guy for 3 straight years? But the level of vitriol is a little insane, in my opinion. I agree. I think it's gotten way out of hand. For the love of God, these exhibition games, I don't even want to say preseason. Preseason is this NFL created word to make us think these games matter a lot more than they don't. I mean, now more than ever, they don't mean shit. They really don't. I mean, these Brian Daboll and all these coaches value the joint practices way more than an exhibition game. So it was a bad mistake. Obviously, that pick six was not pretty on the eyes. This is also quarterback off of a torn ACL in his first game action. I
And
don't know. I mean, in a game that
yeah,
doesn't even really matter, I'd value those joint practices a hell of a lot more than anything you've seen in the exhibition games. And you were there more than me. It sounds like they were pleased with what they saw in Daniel Jones, and that this year is his first chance, really, in his entire career. This is Daniel Jones's first chance to blossom, to be the quarterback that he envisions being. When I asked him, who do you envision being as a quarterback? It is aggressive, going down the field, pulling the trigger, smart with the football, using my legs. He's got more talent around him now than he's ever had in his career. He's better coaching around him now than he's ever had in his career. Devin Singletary is really good, right? I don't think that's going to be a steep fall off going from Saquon Barkley to a running back who, by the way, has averaged more yards per carry than Saquon Barkley. It's not like the line in Buffalo was astronomically better than the bad lines that Barkley had in New York, by the way, too. I think that between Singletary, Tyron Trace, they'll get enough there. Theo Johnson might be a stud at tight end. The team around Daniel Jones is, and the situation around Daniel Jones is better than it's ever been. It would not surprise me one bit if this is Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith, Jared Goff, quarterback late in career, who was left for dead, awakening from the dead, taking a team to the playoffs, maybe winning the division. You've seen it in bursts. There's still been enough there. I believe Joe Shane, Shea Tierney, when they tell me we've seen it, it's there. He's just got to do it. Joe Shane even said, now we got to see it. It's
yeah,
time. There is
yeah.
pressure on him because if he
Oh,
doesn't do it this year,
absolutely.
obviously he's done. And you hope that you're sticking
Absolutely.
around as the coach and the GM.
Absolutely. So yeah, you're drinking some blue Kool-Aid there, there, Ty. No,
Uh, I know. I mean, I've
no,
heard, what's
I
funny, Ed? I've heard from a few sources in the past that I've talked to around the team, and they're like, What happened to you, man? What happened? I said, what happened to me? What happened to the Giants? Look who was running the show then. Look who's running the show now.
Yeah, I people talk about, Joe and Brian being on the hot seat, and what I hope they aren't, to be honest with you, because I think Joe is smart. I think Joe has made some mistakes. Some of his draft picks haven't developed yet the way you'd like them to. But I think and Dabes has made some mistakes, but I think they're smart. I think I think the way that they've approached this year is showing that they're learning from some of those mistakes. And I think that as an organization, you've seen team after team, you don't get anywhere when you blow it up every 2 years, because you're blowing it up, you're getting a new quarterback, you're getting a new coach, you're getting a new GM, you're blowing up the roster because you know that 2 years down the road after you hire the new GM or the new head coach, the entire roster is going to be brand new. So
Yeah.
at some point, you've got to just let it ride long enough with one regime to see if it'll work. And I'm not sure, after 10 years of misery, I'm not sure 2 or 3 years of building is enough.
I totally agree. And in 2021, I would wager there were a lot of people in the organization talking the same way that you were just talking there, Ed. Trying to talk themselves into now Gettleman was going to be on his way out, even though he got like a hero's farewell, which was kind of
Hmm.
bizarre. But I think that the Mara family and the Tishes, they were trying to talk themselves into, okay, we don't want to constantly turn over coaches as an organization. There's something good here with Joe Judge. Let's see this through. And like I said earlier, thankfully, things did fall apart to the point where they had no choice. And that's where you really have to dig into the nitty gritty, the DNA of your team, and to really see the problems, because the problems with that team ran so deep in the front office and scouting and player acquisition and coaching that you couldn't do this half pregnant rebuild. It wasn't going to work. I mean, it rarely ever does. When does it work? When you keep a head coach, bring in a new GM, you hope this arranged marriage is going to work out. I mean, there are not many examples of that working out. So I think, like, when you speak like that, I agree 100%, because it is completely different than 2 years ago. This is a team that finally does know how to look for players, what they're looking for. You're not get like you just said, you're not going to hit on every player, and this Evan Neal pick could come back to haunt the Giants in a big way. But you're going to hit on more than you don't. This is 3 years, 3 draft classes. You're finally able to spend on some guys this past off season. Now they're playing together. Joe Shane made the point that when this season's over, they're only going to have 2 starters who are UFAs, which kind of speaks to a nucleus and a young team growing together. All this stuff matters. I mean, I just saw it with the Detroit Lions being around that team. That's what they did. It was the slow, meticulous, surgical rebuild, trying to find that certain play. Look, Jared Goff was, he did take the Rams to the Super Bowl one year. Let's not forget that. I don't want to, you know, compare this apples to apples with Daniel Jones. But when Jared Goff was traded to the Lions, did anybody think that thing was going to work out? It just seemed like he was a sacrificial lamb, collateral damage. Of course, they're going to find their own quarterback. And he worked out. Things worked out. I will not be surprised one bit if they work out with this team. I'm shocked in Vegas at the over-under, and I don't gamble much. So maybe me going all in on the Giants, maybe I should become more of a gambler and see. I'm basing this off of conversations and instinct and feel and being around this game for a while. I'm shocked that over-under is at 6.5 or whatever it is.
Hmm.
They're going to win 7 games minimum. I mean, this is a team I think is going to go 9-8, 10-7. And the Cowboys, who knows? That thing could collapse. You want to talk about depth? They got no depth. They got the star power that they don't even know how to deal with, and they've got no. I think the Giants have more depth than the Cowboys.
Cowboys are always a mess. Cowboys are always a mess because Jerry has to make it about Jerry all the time. But hey, before I let you go, I want to ask you one last thing. Um, I don't know if you're aware of the whole thing that's been going on with Malik Neighbors and his jersey number. The whole
Yeah, I got the cliff notes.
so he gets jersey number 1, which was retired for Ray Flaherty, was the first NFL jersey ever retired. And some people, because no matter what it is in life, some people always have to be angry about everything. Um, I'm just curious what you think of a team unretiring a jersey number, for a rookie like that. Does it bother you? Do you not care? If the family's okay with it, you're okay with it. Um, just your 2 cents on that whole deal.
Right. I think the sign of a functioning, flourishing society is when people are complaining and up in arms about a jersey number coming out of retirement in a game. Like, if that is really something that pisses you off, if that is really something you're losing sleep over, things must be pretty damn good in your life, because who gives a flying? You know what? Honestly, I think the whole retiring jersey numbers thing is a little overplayed, a little dumb to begin with. Why do we just need to be retiring numbers all the time? I mean, there's a lot of ways to honor your best players. I mean, you got Hall of Fames and Ring of Honors and Pro Football Hall of Fames and banquets, and the champions are back in town. You introduce them, you give them the coin to flip at midfield. There's a million ways to honor your legends. Do we really even need to retire jersey numbers on top of that? Like, who did anybody, like, I don't know. I'm not like in tune with the Giants history like most of your listeners probably. He played 89 years ago. Are there many diehards who go back to that era? And
Yeah.
oh, what am I gonna do now? I got his jersey. I got his card. Do sports cards even exist? They did not exist. Uh, who cares? Oh my god! I saw a couple people all mad about it. I'm like, oh my god, it's
Yeah.
cool. Like, if anything, just it's a cool thing. And Malik Neighbors, man, he said all the right things. He wants to honor the family, and he, I think, more than anything, Ed, that whole discourse tells you what the Giants think about Malik Neighbors. To
Mhm.
know that there's going to be this insane backlash, and it's going to be this big deal, and he's a rookie, and you're letting him wear
Mhm.
that number. It tells you what they think about him. You know, as Tim McDonald asked Joe Shea, like, what's our identity? The identity is Malik Neighbors and pushing the ball down the field with him, getting him involved as much as possible. And then like Joe Shane said, don't want to give too much away. If people want to subscribe and read, but he sees Stephon Diggs, he sees Steve Smith, somebody just wants to rip your throat out.
Absolutely. All right, Ty. Thank you so much for the time. If you want to just remind people, how they can find your work, how they can subscribe, and all that fun stuff.
Thank you so much, man. This was great. GoLongTD.com. All 3 parts, One Giant Leap, are right there at the site. And once you subscribe, it's just $8 a month or $50 for the year. You get all the stories right in your email inbox. And of course, at GoLongTD.com. And you can also download the Substack app. It's part of the Substack network. So that's a good way to read as well. And absolutely, we'll be checking in on these New York Giants throughout the season. And I mean, the whole goal is to just cover the game through a long form lens and write these. Maybe they're not all going to be 12,000 words, but we'll definitely try to be a little different than a lot of the social media slop that's out there, right? And
Yep.
280 characters at a time. I think people do want to take their brains back. I think that there is going to be this pendulum swing back to people wanting to say, no, I'm not going to just scroll all day on my phone. I kind of want to sit and read and learn. And those are the people I'm hoping to serve here.
No, I love it. So appreciate the work. Always learn some things from the work as well. So, and I appreciate the time. So thank you very, very much. And Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.